On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And today, my guest is Nissan Cohen, Dr. Nissan Cohen. So with that, he is the worldwide expert with over 45 years of experience in high purity water systems, pharmaceutical engineering, and water technology innovation. And I'd like to welcome the Dr. Water to the podcast. So it's great to
Thanks for inviting me, Don. I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. And I mean, I'm really looking forward to this because I know the first time that we met, the one question I had asked you was, how is it that if you're in Dubai or you're somewhere where it's mostly desert, how is it possible to manufacture pharmaceuticals? But I'm sure we'll get into things like that in this interview. So I'm really looking forward to it.
The interesting thing about it is that water on the whole of this whole planet, potable water that we can actually drink, is actually less than 0.3% of the total mass of the water on the planet.
Wow.
Yes, there is about 2 to 3% that is actually convertible water, but it's mainly Greenland and Antarctica. And if that becomes water, we're all in really bad situation.
So what was it that actually led you towards this direction of being in the field of high purity or ultra pure water systems in the life sciences?
Originally, I was in agriculture and I was developing applications for brackish water that could be used for agriculture purposes. And I found out that you could actually do oxidation using ozone. And ozone would convert the organic material in the water to carbon dioxide. There was a conductivity shift. That conductivity shift, though, was based upon organics being oxidized. And that later turned into an instrument through a company here in Boulder, Colorado, that devised what was called as a TOC analyzer, total organic carbon analyzer, based upon differential conductivity. So the idea is if you oxidize something and you start with the oxidation of X and go to Y, that differential represents the amount of water, TOC, total organic carbon, that was oxidized. And that's really important in the semiconductor industry because TOC, being a non-ionic material, could not be removed from the water. So it needed to be oxidized. But no one had an instrument that could measure that. And that's where that came from. So that's how we got into ultra pure water in the semiconductor industry back in early 1980s and that sort of thing. And I'd been involved with high purity and ultra pure water systems since 1979, and then in agricultural water systems from 1972 to 1979.
And what was it that made somebody pick up the phone and call you on the life sciences side?
Well, it's a funny story. My boss came to me and he said, I need more revenue. And I said, I can't give you any more revenue, Jack, because we're installed in every semiconductor plant in the world and no one's building anything right now. He says, well, I need more revenue. And I said, well, it's interesting that, there is an industry that does not have a TOC analyzer nor any specification. And that's called the pharmaceutical industry. And the other industry is the laboratory water industry, where they have conductivity monitors, but no TOC analyzers. But you can't take a $14,500 instrument and put it into a $6,000 water system. That doesn't work. So let me go make a phone call. And I called up someone who was one of my old contacts, who was very much involved with the idea of developing RO systems for the pharmaceutical industry back in the late 1980s. And his name was Gary Zaccolani. So I called Gary on the phone and I said, Gary, Nissan, I want to get into the pharmaceutical industry. What do I have to do? So he said, well, there's this group called Pharma, and they are interested in changing the specifications and the ideas that are needed for the pharmaceutical industry. So at that particular time in the early 90s, most of the water chemistry in the pharmaceutical industry was based upon 19th century chemistry and tests. That's what they were doing. Everything from, you know, heavy metals to precipitates to salts to potassium permanganate to look at oxidizable substances, which is all based upon a 1890 test that was developed because of a cholera epidemic in the United States. So the biopharmaceutical industry in the early 1990s had lots of water tests, but they were all based upon 19th century chemistry. And here was almost the 21st century, and we're dealing with chemistry that was devised in the 19th century. So that's how I got involved in the pharmaceutical industry, was to help the pharmaceutical industry develop the instrumentation and tests that are needed in order to show the quality of their water systems without this being onerous and painful.
Like for it to not be onerous and painful, that would be really beneficial. So, you've been recognized as the world, or recognized around the world for over 45 years. Looking back, what's been the most significant career milestone for you, and why does it stand out?
I would say that the most career milestone is the development of TOC analyzers for the pharmaceutical industry. In 1992, when I first got involved with the pharmaceutical industry, there was no online instrumentation at all in the pharmaceutical industry. Everything was laboratory centric, and all tests were performed in a laboratory. And when I met with the first people, they said, we want to look at laboratory instrument. We could care less about online instrumentation. And I said, well, everyone's going to want online instrumentation because they want to understand what's going on with their water systems and be able to get immediate feedback. So that idea of bringing on a TOC analyzer for online, fought vociferously, was the first time that the United States Pharmacopoeia ever issued a mandate that you could perform a test either online or in a laboratory for the same test. And that was released in December of 1997 and became what was called the USP 643 for TOC and 645 for conductivity. Those became two mandated tests that were based upon the pharmaceutical industry, and two others for W5, which was endotoxin and bacteria. And that eliminated all of those other tests that they had been done with 19th century chemistry for the past 100 years. So that was really envious. And the idea of being able to do online instrumentation and in a laboratory, and either result was acceptable for the industry, was quite a milestone. It also created a new industry that turned out today about, I don't know, it's probably a $4 or $5 billion industry based upon TOC, accumulative over the past 10, 12 years.
I mean, I think back to these times, right? That I mean, the late 90s, early 2000s is kind of whenever I was, sort of getting my start in the bioprocess world, and starting to understand a little bit more about drug manufacturing. And one of the things that that I still can't remember, right, is when did I start to see more inline instrumentation? But you're appropriately calling it out here, because it's I mean, obviously a lot of the things that they do today, where it's you've got single use runs and things like that. I mean, you couldn't do all of that stuff without some of the instrumentation that we have today.
That's correct. And don't forget, there was no online instrumentation whatsoever for mandated tests that were part of the Pharmacopoeia. And that changed dramatically. The other issue is, where would we be today in the industry if we didn't have online instrumentation?
Right.
Laboratories are a huge bottleneck in order to process samples. Samples can sit for hours. Samples can mutate over that amount of time. Samples can be adulterated over that time. So, the idea of saying that the laboratory is the greatest place on earth in order to show the efficacy of drugs is not necessarily true. What's really true is, what is the process doing at this time? How is that process being monitored? And how can we show that the process is under control 24/7? That's the difference.
So tell me a little bit more about your current consultancy. So the name of the company is Biopharmaceutical Water Doc, and then What's the mission and what types of clients or projects do you typically work with today?
My mission primarily is to make sure that people are going to be adherent to the different pharmaceuticals or be regulatory compliant. I get called in usually when people have problems, and then I could usually rectify a system in a matter of minutes because of my background of how many decades upon decades upon decades I've been involved with water systems. I can easily readily recognize an issue and have it rectified in a very short amount of time. The other aspect to it, which is really important, is that most pharmaceutical companies are based upon SOPs that were written anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 years ago, and they're still using them. I come in and I show the client how they can remove these SOPs, get rid of SOPs that are antiquated, that they're doing testing for no reason, that has no real application to their water system or their operations, and saying, you know how much this individual sampling is costing you? About $700,000 a year you're spending on sampling that has no relevance to what you're doing now. You have SOPs and you're sending people out to do SOPs that are erroneous. And a classic example happened to me in India a number of years ago, about 3 years ago. I was in at a client, a big bio client, and they have multiple buildings, 45 buildings. This is like, a mile long and half a kilometer wide. And I said, how many WFI water systems do you have on site? And they said, we don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? They said, well, we only deal with this building over here. We don't know. I said, are there maybe 25 WFI water systems? He said, yes, there must be. I said, okay. And these WFI water systems are running hot? Yes, they're running hot. I said, that's great. And we shut them down every month for 2 days to do steam sterilization of our water systems. And I said, what? And They said, yes. I said, you realize what you're doing is you're taking a water system that's already sterilized and taking it down out of production for 2 days every month for 25 units and then doing this every month. And you're losing 50 days of production every month because you're taking it down to perform a function that you don't have to do. It makes no sense. These are self-sterilizing systems. There's no reason to take them down. Why do you do this? Well, we have an SOP telling us we have to do that. And I said, well, hasn't anyone ever stressed you or asked the question, why are we doing this? No one's ever done that. So the point is that they're probably wasting somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 to $125 million in revenue a year because they're taking down their water systems to perform a procedure that they don't have to do. And God knows how long it's been going on. So my assessment is the following. Why did this happen? Maybe 20 years ago, there was an issue with a water system. So they took the water system down. They said, in order to bring that water system back up, what we have to do is steam sterilize it. So they did that for a single incident, and it became rote and it became ingrained in some kind of an SOP, and it just went on from there. Wow. This is as absurd as this sounds. This is not unusual at all. And I one time in the industry about, a year ago, I put in a note on on broadcast, and I said, anyone who hires me, if I can't save you $500,000 a year in operating costs in order to show what's going on when you hire me, you don't have to pay my bill. No one's ever taken me up on it.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing to have, and a great bit of proof as well. So let's talk a little bit about, you're also the co-chair and contributing author for ISPE's Baseline Guide for Pharmaceutical Water and Steam Systems. What do you see as the most important advancements in pharmaceutical water technologies over the past decade?
Primarily the acceptance, not the issue, but the acceptance of membrane-based WFI water being able to produce without distillation. Even in 2002, when the USP brought out, and I was part of the USP at that time, even when we brought out the idea that you could produce WFI water by any means that you would like, as long as it met the criteria for WFI water from the Pharmacopoeia, The Europeans rebelled against it. And they said, well, you can't do this with RO water. And they created a new classification called high purity water, which was actually WFI water, but not called WFI water, but it met all the criteria. Years go by. It's now 2010, 2012, 2015. And finally, the Europeans come back to us and say, you know what? We want to revisit this. So finally in 2017, they started to do some aspects. And then 2019, we got more involved. And they came up with a criteria saying you can develop WFI water by means other than just distillation by using membrane technology with other modules. And that was fine. The only outstanding outlier at that time was the Chinese Pharmacopoeia, because the Chinese Pharmacopoeia said you could produce WFI water by distillation only. So, and it said that you had to use purified water in order to feed the system for the distillation. That was changed this year in 2025. So now all the pharmacopoeias in the world state, major pharmacopoeias and secondary pharmacopoeias, state that you can use membrane-based WFI water or modules that are associated with that to produce WFI water and run it in ambient temperatures. You don't have to run it at high temperatures. The difference that this is making to the industry is all those distillation units and heating up water for interminable amount of times is a tremendous amount of carbon production. And that carbon production for a distillation unit can easily be, let's say, a 40 gallon per minute multi-effect still. You know, it's around 750 metric tons of carbon per year. That's one unit. What happens when you have 5 or 6 units on site? So the idea here is through the membrane-based technology, we can actually reduce the carbon footprint to 0.
Wow.
And I think that's more important right now to the industry than anything else. I'm sorry about the light. It's
no problem. So this is a sideline sort of question because what keeps running through my head, I mean, first of all, for anybody that doesn't know, sort of the membrane technology is essentially using a membrane to filter the water itself. What I guess I would question in part of that, and I always wondered this whenever I've had RO systems of my own, whenever an RO system rejects a certain amount of that water, it seems to be doing it based on percentage, not necessarily on the purity of the water.
It rejects the impurities that are in the water at that time. The cleaner the water that's fed to the RO, the less amount of reject there's going to be. But there's always going to be the reject and the concentration in that reject. So that's where that comes to play.
Gotcha.
But it's not only the RO system, it's the whole generation skid, because there's ion exchange resins downstream using what's called EDI in order to purify the water much better. Any workhorse of a water system in the pharmaceutical industry is the RO. The RO is the workhorse. There's the pretreatment that actually feeds the water to the RO, but that's all preparation so that the RO can work as well as it does.
Sure. After
that, you have the ion exchange to reduce the conductivity of the water down to almost nothing. And that is 0.054 microsiemens as an example. And then there's UV for bacteria or whatever. But the point is that mechanism of using RO and EDI, regardless of UV and ultrafiltration downstream, still can produce really excellent WFI water. And that's where the industry is going. Besides that, they're going to ambient applications using ozone as a sanitary. And the reason that's important is if you think about all the heat exchangers that were used to heat up the water before, that uses an incredible amount of energy, carbon generated from fossil fuels and everything else. And you're heating water up to cool it down at delivery. So you heat up the water to run at 80 degrees C, then you got to cool it down to 20 degrees C in order to deliver at the point of use anyway. So all of that heating and cooling, again, is more energy and costs a tremendous amount of money. People don't understand how big the OpEx issues are in their current systems, because cost accounting is never done in the pharmaceutical industry. You can't ask someone to say, how much does this cost? Because it's all a black hole.
Mhm.
They don't know about how much the heat exchangers are and how many BTUs and the cooling and this and that. That's why someone like me comes in and I can say, yeah, I can give you the total amount of cost this is. And oh, by the way, to upgrade your system, the ROI is only 6 months or 4 months, because you've never done cost accounting on what it really costs you now on your current operational issues. And that's one of the most disconcerting things in the biopharmaceutical industry, is that there is no cost accounting, and people really don't know how much things really cost in order to produce product.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability and zero liquid discharge. They seem to
Yeah.
be becoming more pressing issues. From your perspective, particularly in Europe, what progress has been made towards carbon zero water management, and what lessons should the U.S. biopharmaceutical industry be taking from that?
In Europe, there are already statutes available through the EU that gives targets for companies who have more than 250 employees that needs to be assigned by the end of 2025 to the EU in order to show how your company is going to deal with what's called source 1, source 2, and source 3 issues as far as carbon and the environment is concerned, etc. So the EU has already dictated a modular effect of how to attack every aspect having to do with climate change, not only from the water and critical utility side, from engineering, from economics, from finance, from all kinds of other issues that having to deal with transportation, trucking, shipping, etc., or environmentally, how you're going to use the water coming into your facility, and how are you going to make a determination of how to turn that water back without it being tainted and contaminated. So many of the pharmaceutical companies, especially the pharmaceutical industry in Europe, have set goals by 2030 to be not only carbon zero, but also to start looking at zero liquid discharge in order to maximize the use of the water, how to treat the water, how to use the water and put it back into the creek so that it is good as or better when they took it out of the creek originally.
Mm.
Here in the United States, unfortunately, under the current administration, all of the ideas of recycle, reclaim, reuse, and enforcement have been alleviated and destroyed. So at this particular time, there's no incentive for anyone to do anything. Last week, the administration took all the incentives away for electrical vehicles. And Cadillac has made over the last 5 years this incredible investment on electric vehicles. And now the administration is telling them, no, let's just use more gas and more. So there is no really good knowledge of what needs to be done. The incentives for solar, wind energy, electric vehicles, etc., have been curtailed. There's no incentive for anyone to invest in it. There's no incentive for biopharmaceutical companies to become corporate citizens about what they're doing unless they do it on their own time and they claim that it's important to them. Most of the American sites for European and Japanese companies are already on board within their company to make that 2030 issue. So I'm dealing with all kinds of engineering developments on what needs to be done in order to get to carbon zero on one standpoint, or zero liquid discharge, or recycle, reclaim, and reuse, and how to reuse the water. I came from a country, Israel, where water is probably the most important commodity that exists in the whole country. There's only one freshwater lake, which is the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is not a sea. It's a 5 by 8 mile lake. It's pretty small on the whole. And it's the only major freshwater source of water. In the year 2000, Israel realized that 30% of their total resource of water was actually being exported in fruit. So oranges and grapefruit and that sort of thing were taking 30% of the water sources and being exported. And the Israeli government stepped in and said, no, we're going to get rid of this. We're not going to do export anymore. We don't have to do agricultural export. We're very much a technology-oriented country, and we're going to stop it. Now, how many people could actually think about doing something like that, let alone come up with the idea of making it work? In Israel, the amount of resources that are there today are the exact same resources when the population was 2 million versus 9 million. So you have to become very adept at developing technologies in order to do recycle, reuse, and reclaim. The old joke in Israel is by the time the water gets to the southern part of Israel, from the northern part of Israel where the water comes from, it's been through 3 sets of kidneys. The point is that, as funny as that might sound, it's actually, there's somewhat validity to it. And the idea is that Israel is very knowledgeable about what to do with their water, and water for agriculture purposes and water for drinking water. Matter of fact, the desalination plant in south of Tel Aviv produces such a great amount of water that the excess that's used is actually pumped up to the Sea of Galilee to keep the Sea of Galilee topped off. And it's incredible what goes on. The invention of the 2 tab toilets here in the United States, one for liquid and one for solid waste, that was developed in Israel in the 1970s. And Israel had set up ideas and recyclable and reclaimable ideas at that particular time. In Israel, any hot water heater is only manufactured from solar. So every hot water heater in Israel since 1978, regardless of how big your apartment building is, uses solar heat in order to heat up the water. You can't use water for electricity. You can't use water with gas or anything else. It's only produced by solar by law.
Wow. It's an amazing thought, especially given how far the pendulum has swung here in the United States and sort of the path forward. So when you think about the way that these things could impact water management and regulatory compliance in biopharma, what do you think happens next?
Well, the first thing that I think that happens is that the biopharmaceutical industry has lived on borrowed time for years. Water here in the United States is poorly managed and does not cost a lot of money. But you pay for the water twice. You pay for the water coming into the facility, and you pay for the water going down the drain. There's a tremendous amount of wastage in the biopharmaceutical industry due to the use of rinse of water for vessels. And it's all based upon, big pharma 1980s protocols that were used in order to clean vessels. And no one's changed it since. But there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of gallons of water every day from one pharmaceutical site that is going down the drain that's not recoverable. And the point is that we need to be better stewards of the environment. The other thing, too, is being better stewards is going to make it more economically viable also. Because what we're doing is not only recycling, reclaiming, and reusing, but we have better management and knowledge of our water usage. And that becomes very, very critical. And it saves a tremendous amount of money. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars just in water a year, maybe $700,000 to $800,000 that can be saved by doing simple things, not extravagant engineering. Simple, knowledgeable things. We just need to be cognizant and to move in that direction.
It just seems like it seems like we all love a good emergency to try and recover from things, and why wait until that emergency is already here, to have to deal with it at that point in time. So yeah, taking those proactive steps seems to be the right way to go. Tell me a little bit about your background in agricultural water, and how has it influenced your approach to pharmaceutical water systems today?
In 1972, I had an orchard on my kibbutz, which was an apple, plum, and pear orchard that had just been installed and had been planted with 25,000 trees. And it was the first drip irrigation system that was associated with an orchard in Israel at that particular time. And one of the things that I had noticed is that the drippers themselves have a certain amount of filtration needed in order to take out the silt the coming in the water, because if there's silt, it will gum up the drippers. The drippers won't function properly. So at each particular point in the orchard, there was a canister in order to clean up the water, meaning a filter and that sort of thing. And next to it was a tank that you could add fertilizer to, and the fertilizer would be administered to the trees by the drip irrigation system. Having been a competitive swimmer, and when I lived in the United States, I worked in swimming pools, and I realized that you could backflush filters in order to get rid of the gunk that was in. So instead of having to do this in every individual section of the water system, I devised an idea that was called the first automated flushing system for drip irrigation, where we set up columns of tanks. And these tanks over here had clean water, and they fed water to the tanks over here that needed to be backflushed. And we shut off the valve, then backflushed the water and cleaned them out. And when the other tanks over here needed to be cleaned, we reversed the opposite direction, always using clean water to backflush the water and set it up. The point is that we prevented a lot of the silt from getting downstream into the delivery system and allowed us to change the orchard so that we had 40,000 trees instead of 25,000 trees. And then we expanded it to like 65,000 trees across the street. Because it was the first orchard ever to have high density deciduous fruit trees and a drip irrigation system, it was all new play. So I did my master's on that module of doing a automated flushing system for drip irrigation in 1975 and 1979. Did the work in order to show how to do an avocado orchard halfway down the Golan Heights. And that area could only get water at night. And you couldn't go down at the night because it was right next to the border. They were afraid that the Jordanians and the Syrians were going to pick us off if we were working out there at night. So we had to figure out how to operate a water system remotely at that time when computers were just starting to get involved. So I had set up using a PLC, a programmable logic controller, and other controllers in order to open and close the valves of certain areas in order to do the irrigation. And it was controlled by a Motorola wireless functional system that I had in my room on my kibbutz, and I sent over because it was about 3 miles away. I went to a repeating tower and then down the mountain in order to hit the irrigation system. And that was what I did my doctorate on. And it was the first use of computers for drip irrigation and controlled by wireless technology.
Very cool. Can you share a recent project or client example that you've worked on to deliver a more sustainable water solution?
Yeah, there was a company in Minnesota where I showed them how to remove their multi-effect distillation units, which were there were two running in tandem right behind in series, with one was off, the other one was on, and how that could be used with membrane-based WFI water that they already had. They were using a membrane-based and ion exchange, which was actually WFI water, but wasn't classified as WFI water, to feed those distillation units. The distillation units produced WFI water that went into two tanks. And what I showed them is we could eliminate that just using the generation system, and then be able to run it on an N+1 by putting a second generation system and dealing with their pre-treatment that they already had in order to make sure they had the maximum amount of need. And they could have an N+1 system, which is important sometimes in the pharmaceutical industry. Not that I'm a great advocate of N+1, but people believe in redundancy and they want to pay for it. That's up to them. And showing them that they could actually produce WFI water, get rid of the distillation units, and reduce their carbon footprint from 1,550 metric tons per year to 0.
How long, I'm just curious from an industrial perspective, how long do ionization or deionization media how long does it last on average,
On
you
an
know, for
EDI, which is a continuous deionization system, it's usually about 4 to 5 years.
oh,
The
wow.
ion exchange, the resins will last. Sometimes a little less, depending upon loading, but we're talking about pretty clean water that's coming into it, so they'll last pretty while. And they are regenerated by the anodes and cathodes that are there in the sequence next to the resins. So there's no chemicals that are needed in order to regenerate it. It's not like a softener where we have to add salt and that sort of thing.
Right.
But they'll last a good 4 to 5 years, and then they have to be refurbished or changed out.
Very interesting. All right, so let's come back to some questions about you. So, what leadership advice has had the most profound impact on your professional journey?
When I was in Israel, someone said to me the following: miracles we can do every day, impossibilities take a little longer. And what that means is that you can do things if you have the creativity to look outside the box. And the pharmaceutical industry does not do that. They don't look outside the box and they don't think about it. They set up a procedure and then they'll live by that procedure until it dies, whether they need it or not. And the point is that they could be a lot more effective if they would adopt newer technologies and newer developments. It takes forever to change anything in the biopharmaceutical. And the excuse that's used is, well, we are under regulatory scrutiny and we have to be compliant. Well, yeah, so does everyone else in the world. But the point is that doesn't make any difference about adopting technology. The more data you have, the better the investigator from the FDA will have knowledge of how you operate your system. So that's the idea. The idea is to adopt the technology, to get the throughput, to get the quality, to get the control aspects to it so that you know you're never out of control. And then you can operate 24/7 in 24/7 continuous operations with no deviations.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, to me, it takes a few things, right? To be inquisitive, use your whole, um, use your whole mind and body to try and understand a little bit better. What was it that put these things in place, and then question. I mean, what's funny to me is as I hear you describe the situation, the one thing that keeps coming back to me is early in my quality journey, a lot of the conversations we would have would be on really getting to root cause, not stopping one or two levels in and really getting down to that root cause. And I find that there are a lot of people in especially pharmaceuticals or medical devices where they will stop and accept the easy answer. And anybody that's worked with me has seen this before where I question, but what would happen if we went one or two levels more and asked why we have to do this or
And
really
the point is
understand?
that root causes cause issues that may be a singular effect,
Yeah.
not to the whole process. It happened because of an anomaly. But what happens is the people then write a procedure and a protocol based upon that root factor that is now applicable across the whole industry or the whole company or the whole site. And that's what happens with ingrained SOPs become involved in the operation of the physical process at any given time, where that SOP may or may not have any real validity.
And a very critical point to make for sure. So, Dr. Nissan Cohen, what inspires you?
Challenges, fun, new applications, new things that happen, things that are bizarre. I love to be able to get involved with a water system or an industry or a company that has something that's really unique and being able to solve it. And there was a company down in Alabama, as an example. They had blue water coming through, and it was stopping their filtration, and they're on the pre-filter side and on the pre-treatment, and it was this beautiful cyanic blue. So I said, does anybody check the water system on what's actually in the water coming in? No. So I said, can you give me a water panel? And they said, yeah. So I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for sulfate and I'm looking for copper. And I realized that they have copper tubing on their pretreatment, and it matches with the copper sulfate, and it produces copper sulfate, which is this beautiful cyanic blue. They had been living with this and they had no idea where it was coming from. And it just took someone who had a little bit of knowledge to say, hey, if we can get rid of the sulfate on the front, we're not going to have the copper sulfate. You're not going to have the blue anymore and destroying all your filters that are now cyanic blue. But on the other standpoint, if you want the sulfate there, then let's get rid of the copper tubing. Pretty simple. There's two options here that you can move. Why no one else actually picked up on that, I have no idea. But the point was that it was so strange. I had never seen it in my professional career, but it was based upon an experiment I think I did in a chemistry lab in college 55 years ago or something like that.
Wow.
And it was bizarre, but I was able to pick up on something, and that was really, really enjoyable because it was fun, but it was enjoyable, and being able to find solution for a client in a very rapid manner based upon something so bizarre.
Absolutely. What concerns you?
What concerns me the most is that this planet is dying and no one realizes it. That what we're doing is band-aiding, trying to band-aid functions where we're not really addressing the total issues associated with it. You know, people are talking about going back to using coal. Well, great, use coal. And let's get mercury more in the air, and let's get poison the air with more mercury. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, well, let's, use more fossil fuels. Well, fossil fuels only run for certain levels. And what are you going to do with all the carbon and the emissions that you're sending into the atmosphere that's going to cause the climate change that's even worse than it is now? I'm going to tell you something right now, Don, that is almost unbelievable. The Colorado ski areas in 20 years will no longer exist. There will no longer be enough water or snow in order to keep the industry going. The Colorado River cannot support 40 million people downstream. It's already, the snowpack is less than it ever has been. And climate change, regardless of what the administration says, is not going to stop. It's going to cause continuous amount of problems that are going to be unsolvable. And what we're doing is we're killing the planet in a very rapid manner. And people have no idea. Take into consideration also that 0.3% of the potable water that's on the planet that I talked about a half an hour ago supported 2 billion people and now supports almost 9 billion people. We don't have enough water. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough ways in order to make sure that the population of the world can sustain itself. In 2000, the UN declared that by 2050, there would be a 400% increase in the use of potable water. 400% increase, but no one has changed the amount of sources. Now, can I say something to someone who's living in Chicago or on a Great Lake? They could care less about my water problem here in Colorado. Can I talk to someone in Canada that has hundreds of thousands of lakes in Manitoba alone that is all fresh water in its usage, but there's not a population that can use it? No, I can't do anything about that. Are we going to start bundling up water from Canada and shipping it to the middle of Africa? I have no idea. But the point is that the systems that we currently have are unsustainable.
Mm.
And that's not going to change.
Go ahead.
That's it. It's not going to change.
It's a critical point, and thank you for sharing your concern. I certainly echo a lot of the same sentiments that, I think it doesn't take for you to be a meteorological genius to figure out the fact that something is happening with the planet. It also doesn't take for you to be a chemist or somebody that is working in the water industry to understand that there are issues on getting clean drinkable water either. And so how do we address all of these things together is absolutely critical. The last question, what excites you?
What excites me is that I can still perform as well as I do at my age, that I will continue to be doing this as long as my head and my brain still works and I can communicate well with my clients and they're still willing to pay me, I won't retire and I'll keep doing this. I mean, I still write every day. I write articles. I write this. I write that. It's not only the baseline guide for water and steam. I was just the chairman of the C&Q, Commissioning and Qualification for Water and Steam, that is going to press this week. And by Wiley, and is out now as a chairman of that. I was a chairman of the process gases for the biopharmaceutical industry for ISPE and other documents. And I'm working on a sustainability document right now. And my point is that am I supplying the knowledge that will help foster the legacy of what needs to be done in the pharmaceutical industry? I don't see a lot of young people coming in saying that they want to be water experts in the pharmaceutical industry. It's not all that glamorous. But the point is that the pharmaceutical industry cannot exist without water. Water is the most important excipient that's used in pharmaceutical manufacturing, whether it's tablets, whether it's oral solid dosage, whether it's biopharmaceutical applications, whether it's biotechnology, or whether it's traditional vaccines and biologics. Water is critical. And if we don't have the proper quality of water, we cannot manufacture drugs and pharmaceuticals, period.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an important point to share. And I certainly wish you all that longevity as well, that, you continue to work in this industry. We continue to get to see the great things that you're doing. So Dr. Nissan Cohen, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here.
Don, thank you. And if we want to do this again, please let me know.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.